I am coming off a little bit as defensive, and I recognize that because I do feel really defensive of when people say, like, if I talk about suicide, then I'm going to be kicked off campus, because I'm like, that is just so untrue, and it really keeps people from sharing their experience and potentially getting support that we can provide.
So I think going to like a little more like sensitive territory.
Okay.
Um, so have you heard of like the Ruderman Family Foundation, Rudderman something?
I don't think I may have, but it's not ringing a bell right off the top of my head.
Sure. So they're like I guess like evaluative body that
Mm,
like considers like mental health faculties at
mm-hmm.
various colleges around the world or around the country or world or whatever. They did a report on the Ivy League that they call like white papers. So Dartmouth wasn't much worse than all of its peers, but
Okay.
like still pretty bad. Like it was
Okay.
like I don't think any of the Ivies received above like a 30 out of 45, and Dartmouth
Okay.
had like a 23 or something for like mental health resources. And among the things cited, it was like medical leave policies. It was like number of counselors, like amount of like resources and
Hmm.
commitment. Why do you think we're like graded so low?
Well, I think it's tough for me to comment on that fully because I
Haven't read
know
it.
this is like ringing a bell. Yeah, I haven't
Yeah,
read it and I don't know exactly what's being assessed. But I
sure.
can say that I hope that will improve
I can
with.
read it to you. I mean, keep
Oh,
going,
sure.
but
Yeah.
I can
Yeah.
read
Yeah.
to you in a sec. Yeah.
I was going to say one of the things that I hope will at least be improved is one of the things that you mentioned about the ratio of like counselors to students. We have hired new counselors recently. We plan on continuing to hire, and so I do hope that piece will at least help, improve that rating. And more than any rating, I hope that will help increase access and have us
Hmm.
kind of allow us to see students longer term than we're currently able to. Um, Regarding the medical leave policy, that's not actually a counseling center policy, so it's
Oh,
hard
interesting.
for it's a college policy, and the medical leave actually kind of lives in the dean's office. And so
Oh,
yeah, I can't like fully speak to that. We are involved in the process when a student requests our support for a medical withdrawal.
is that
Um,
Dean Lively? Like,
the dean, like the undergraduate dean's office. So
okay.
yeah, these will be like every student's assigned a dean, and so that's
So does it
actually
vary by dean, like the policy?
no, the policy is the same, and I if I look it up now, I could find the medical withdrawal policy, and you can find that on it's a college policy that the deans ultimately kind of enact. And then there are other people who participate in that process depending on, so if a person, for example, is wanting to take a medical withdrawal because they contracted mono
Yeah.
and were kind of down and out for much of the term and couldn't keep up with their academic work and want to take a medical leave, they would contact like their primary care physician or something to support that medical withdrawal.
Hmm.
Um, Other times, students are dealing with mental health concerns like depression or other mental health concerns that they aren't able to function at their best, and they want to take a medical withdrawal to help improve their symptoms and get to a place where they're functioning kind of at a level that feels good to them, that feels like they can succeed at Dartmouth, whatever that means for them. And
Right.
our office would then support that medical leave based on our assessment of a person's mental health. Does that make sense?
Yeah. That makes perfect sense. That makes perfect sense. I, yeah, I think that's what a lot of the controversy has been over the past year, especially with like I don't know if you heard about the final student who unfortunately passed away, but like she like told the college she was like don't send me home for like medical leave like involuntarily because that's like a worse environment for me mentally,
Yeah.
and then they sent her home and she passed away unfortunately.
Yeah.
So like yeah, good.
Yeah, and I was just going to say I can't, speak to any specific student or situation based on
Right,
what I
of
referenced
course.
earlier in terms of confidentiality. Um, but that is there's no way, that is like a devastating situation. It is heartbreaking and horrible. Like there's just no way around that. Thinking kind of stepping back from that particular situation and thinking about the medical withdrawal policy more broadly and really just about numbers, I think that there, kind of like we were talking about earlier in terms of people sharing about their bad experiences with counseling services generally, and that you hear more about that. I think that's even exaggerated with mental or with medical withdrawal experiences. The vast majority of people who take medical withdrawals for mental health reasons come to our office requesting that, and we are not the people who are even often recommending that. They're coming to us requesting it. And sometimes people are feeling kind of forced into taking a medical withdrawal
Yeah.
because they're failing their classes, and the only option that feels viable to them is taking a medical withdrawal so that those grades don't kind of end up counting toward their GPA, or they've kind of gotten into a position that it's no long they might be suspended if they continue or something to that effect. And I think those people can sometimes say, I was forced to take a medical withdrawal or a medical leave, when we weren't really the ones doing the forcing. No one was really doing the forcing, but it was a really difficult situation where they had to choose between either failing their classes or taking care of their mental health and going on a leave that didn't look exactly what
Right.
like wanted to look like.
But isn't there like a policy that I'm like I remember hearing about this even before this like the unfortunate like thing that
Yeah.
happened to the student. But like, isn't there a policy where if Dartmouth thinks you're like a liability or something like in terms of mental health, or they're like, or they think you're like not well, then you're like forced to go home.
So there is a policy that I encourage you to look up in a little bit more detail because I cannot articulate it perfectly here, but there is a policy around that kind of speaks to a person's well-being, ability to keep themselves safe, how they might endanger the community or not. There are different kind of factors that play into that decision. But I think what's really important is we have about one of those, what we call involuntary medical withdrawals, that come up every 3 years. Like this is a very rare occurrence. And in those situations where there are involuntary medical withdrawals that are kind of, I'll say, on the table, like it's brought up in conversation, we are working with the student's family, the dean's office, our office, assuming, we're involved if it's a mental health related concern. Um, and students are always provided the option and encouraged to get a second opinion from other mental health providers if
Right.
they disagree with our assessment.
But like, my question is, why does that even happen? Like, why would someone be forced? Well, why would anyone be kicked off campus, especially if they're saying like, no, my like support structure's on campus and I'd be worse off at home.
Yeah, I think it's a really tough situation because when you think of the mental health services that are available here, we can't provide inpatient services where a person is staying we're not a mental health facility in that same way, right? We can't have someone stay in a locked facility where they can not have access to means to harm themselves or other people. We do not have kind of oversight over students in a way where we can monitor where they are and that they're safe at all times. We're balancing lots of different things
Yeah,
in
I
these
don't.
decisions.
Yeah, I don't know. I think like in my experience at least, and from what I've heard and read about in articles and things like that from the Dartmouth, it's actually not that uncommon for people, if not having to be like forced to take involuntary leave, like at least the threat of involuntary leave like makes an actual real impact on people's like decision making. Like there's an article that I was reading, like just people are basically it's saying that people like don't seek help because they think that if they go and seek help for like mental illness, they'll be kicked off campus because they'll be deemed like like for all the reasons you said. So like I don't know. I just feel like there has to be a better solution than like
Well,
kicking people off campus.
I I agree with you largely. I think that what you're referring to, I just don't think our numbers support that. Over 50% of the people who we see disclose that they have suicidal thoughts. Nowhere near 50% of those people are ever talking with us about taking a medical withdrawal. We probably have maybe
50%? That's crazy.
yeah, so we see
Yeah.
about a fourth of the student body. About
Yeah.
50% of those people disclose suicidal thoughts. And I mean, you can do the math there. On
Yeah, it's like 800 students. Yeah.
a typical year, we might have between, I don't know, I'm guessing here, maybe 70 medical withdrawals that are voluntary that a student chooses. Um, and we might have conversations with people about an involuntary medical leave, maybe 3 students per year, and an involuntary medical leave actually happens maybe once every 3 years. These are estimates. I don't want like I'm giving these numbers to try to give context. I am not 100% sure about each of them, but that is like looking at our stats, that's approximately um, how it all shakes out. So it's just not true that if people come here and share with us that they're having thoughts about suicide, that they're going to be forced to leave campus. So I agree with you. Like they shouldn't be. Like we don't want them to be. Our priority is keeping people on campus, and really our priority is helping people reach their goals, whatever that is. And we are doing our best to support people in doing that. Sometimes what we have available is insufficient support for students, and so we make recommendations for higher levels of care. Sometimes they follow those recommendations and other times they don't. Sometimes because the risk is so high, and those are the really rare circumstances. If the risk is so high, we're making these recommendations and they're not following them, then we say, this is not an environment that's supportive of you. It would be irresponsible of us to let you be in this harmful environment. You can no longer, and that's, I mean, it's a vast oversimplification of the involuntary medical withdrawal process, but that is also not made in the counseling center's office. We don't
Right.
we
Okay.
don't make
Sure.
that decision either.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I don't know. I have nothing against, the counseling center. I have
No,
like,
no, and
you
I
know,
mean, I hope that I'm not coming. I am coming off a little bit as defensive, and I recognize that because I do feel
yeah.
really defensive of when people say like if I talk about suicide, then I'm going to be kicked off campus because I'm like that is just so untrue, and it really keeps people from sharing their experience and potentially getting support that we can provide. We will absolutely, if you come in and say you're having suicidal thoughts, we will not kick you off campus. We will ask more about those thoughts and we will do what we can to keep you safe and collaborate with you to figure out a plan for that. But like I said, the 50% of our students that we see are talking about suicidal thoughts, and not that many people are going on medical leaves, and certainly not that many are going on involuntary medical leaves.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. So wait, so like one of the things you said was like the counseling center doesn't make that determination, right?
Yeah.
So would that be the dean's office then that
Yeah,
takes that?
typically when it's an involuntary medical withdrawal, there are people higher up kind of are brought into the decision-making process. So what I mean by that is it may it may kind of go up if it's being
Right.
challenged, right? If it's involuntary, um, there are a lot of checks on the process because it's like we're absolutely not wanting to force a student who shouldn't have to leave. So if they have to do that, there are a lot of checks on the process and it might go up to the dean of the college or the dean of the college. So like
Okay,
Catherine
so
Lively.
does it start with you guys then and then move up to Dean Lively?
So the support for a mental health related medical withdrawal starts with us, yes. And if
Okay.
we are making that recommendation, and it starts with us and the dean's office, really. It can start at either location, or either office. But, and if our office and the dean's office are both kind of agreeing that this is not a safe environment for the student, us from a mental health perspective, them from their perspective, then we will make our recommendation. If the student doesn't want to follow that recommendation and the risk is still high enough that there needs to be further action taken, then it will kind of go up um, the chain of command, and uh, other people will be brought into that decision making process to make sure we're making the right decision.
Okay. Okay. What kinds of circumstances would compel you guys to um, say like I think this person needs to be placed on
Yeah.
involuntary medical leave?
You know,
Like I know
honestly,
obviously like you said, like harming people, but like aside from
yeah.
that, which I think is like obvious, right?
Yeah. Um, what makes it really hard for me to give an example of this is I have never placed a person on, like, I've never supported an involuntary medical withdrawal. So it's hard
Sure.
for me to, like, even give an example. Um, but I, yeah, it's really hard for me to say because any example I give, I actually, like, I worry would backfire and then someone with would hear this with a similar concern and think, oh, I can't share about that. When really it's
Right.
like a very specific set of circumstances. So a person is such a danger to themselves, right? Like they're not able to care for themselves. That might be their experiencing really intense suicidal thoughts with plans to act on those thoughts, means to act on those thoughts, and can't safety plan or say that they can keep themselves safe if they stay here. Um, that might be if a person has an eating disorder that they're really struggling with, and despite their best efforts, they cannot get themselves to um, kind of engage healthily with food, whatever that means for them. If they're restricting to a point where their health is deteriorating and they may not live, one of the most fatal
Right.
mental health disorders.
Right.
Um, you know, if there needs
So
to be a
why
higher level of intervention.
right, so why is the solution to any of those things to send them home?
So the solution really isn't to send them home so much as it is to not send them anywhere, but like to help them to get connected with a higher level of care. So usually that is a either an inpatient program, so something where somebody's
Right.
staying residentially at a mental health facility, a partial hospitalization program, so they might be staying there for periods of time and then sleeping at home or sleeping nearby, an intensive outpatient program where they might be meeting every day for a short period of time or 3 times a week, or some sort of higher level of care that we cannot provide here.
Mm. Could
So
that
it's not
not
like go
happen?
home. It's not like
Right.
go home to your parents' house or your guardian's house and hang out and that will be better. Like that's not at all, that's never the recommendation. It's getting them connected with um a higher level of treatment.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. Could that not happen like locally?
Usually not because we don't have a lot of those treatment centers available. If it can happen locally and a person can remain in classes while doing so, that is what happens.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense.
And actually, in this remote
Yeah.
environment, there have been some exceptions to that as well, because typically an involuntary medical withdrawal wasn't so much about academics as it was about like you need to be in this treatment. And if you need to go to Arizona to be in this treatment, you're not going to be able to engage in your courses. Whereas that's been a little bit different in this past year. If somebody needs to be in a different location but can still engage in courses, they can do that.
Right. That makes sense. That makes sense actually. Okay. So then all the cases that like that that exist where people are like placed on I guess involuntary medical leave and then they're all like with the idea that they would go home or go wherever and then go to like a more like substantial like inpatient program or like more comprehensive outpatient program or
Yes.
something like that.
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
Okay. That makes sense. What would happen if like let's say someone says like please don't send me home, like all my support systems are here, like this is the place where I feel most comfortable.
Yeah.
I know
I
that's a very tough situation and that probably doesn't happen
yeah,
a lot, but
it
like
is
what
really
would happen
tough.
then?
But I think
Yeah.
what we try to do as best we can is collaborate with that person to brainstorm. Okay, what are the options? If here isn't safe for you because together we've determined that here isn't safe for you either, but all of your supports are here. Are there ways that you can stay in this area and engage in a higher level of care? Okay, no, that's not an option. Okay, are there supports that you have located other places, even if that's not home for you? Like, how can we brainstorm around that? Are there other family supports? Are there other friend supports? Um, this is always comes after we've already exhausted kind of all of the options available through the counseling center, through making some academic adjustments, like that has already been exhausted. And then we just collaborate. And it's like, this is tough stuff, right? Like, I'm sure you have experienced situations where there's not a good option available, right? There's not like, oh yeah, I'm excited about this option. So we're like choosing between rough options that don't feel perfect, but we're trying to figure out together what's the best of these options that don't feel ideal.